Welcome, everyone, to the Local Control Subcommittee meeting. In this Monday, April 23rd, we are calling to order at 5:07. Roll call. Ms. Brunel. Here. Mr. Romero. Dr. Gloria Caballero.
Here.
And Dr. Rivera Colon, that's me, here. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Housekeeping things first. On March 29, 2023, Governor Healy signed into law a supplemental budget bill which, among other things, extends the temporary provisions pertaining to the open meeting law to March 31st, 2025. Specifically, this further extension allows public bodies to continue holding meetings remotely without a quorum of the public body physically present at a meeting location, and to provide adequate alternative access to remote meetings. The language does not make any substantive changes to the open meeting law other than extending the expiration date of the temporary provisions regarding remote meetings from March 31st, 2023 to March 31st, 2025. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 20, I'm hereby informing all attendees that a video and audio recording is being made of the meeting, and the meeting is being live streamed and run on the Live Cities Community TV channel. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Everybody's favorite topic of the season, budget. We received in our very first meeting our document for Holyoke Public School Committee capacity building, and it included a section of budget. We had a meeting with our finance committee chair in order to make sure that we had all the information available, as well as with our receiver, Mr. Soto, and Vice Chair, Ms. Brunel. I would like to entertain a motion to suspend the rules to allow Mr. Wellahan, the chair of the Finance Committee, to be able to speak at this meeting.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Okay. Mr. Wellahan, can you come up? We also would like to recognize that in attendance is also Mr. Callamore. Thank you so much for being here. And Mr. Soto is also here joining us today. As for all our local subcommittee meetings, we have Acting Commissioner Russell Johnston and the Chief of Staff, Lauren Wu, as well. Welcome to both of you. So one of the things that we were doing is going through all the things that we should be learning and being trained on in the process of transitioning to local control about the budget was kind of like taking almost like stock about what are the things that we already do and have in place and things that we will be able to do very soon. One of the points that was brought up in the capacity building document was maintain and establish budget subcommittee. We have our finance and operations subcommittee up and running. And I would like to ask Mr. Wellahan to kind of like give a little bit of an overview of what the subcommittee does or has been doing so far. Mr. Wellahan.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, just we're having meetings as needed, not necessarily monthly, but as needed with Mr. Soto and Sean, the finance director, just to get updates on current budget numbers, how they relate to the district. Is there any need for additions? We've been really concentrated on the money that we got through the federal funding program, SR, I guess. Moving forward, we want to concentrate on those issues. We want to concentrate on, well, let me back up. We changed the name of the committee to finance and operations, just to get a firmer viewpoint of the needs of the school system in terms of the facilities. I know Mr. Soto, that was his former title, the finance and operations. So I know he's done a lot of work with the operational growth and improvements with the school buildings. I know Mr. Calmore has been a champion of that for years. I know in the past, I thought personally there's been deferred maintenance on a lot of projects. I know even the school facility manager has, in publicly stated that, he had some sort of phrase, we fix it till it breaks, until it's just, it's just the policy, we just need more of a long-term plan just to, get the facilities manageable. We all know that there's only a limited amount of money out there. I know the district, I pointed this out at many meetings. We're in a better financial situation here in Holyoke than our surrounding communities. Amherst, Belchertown, Northampton, they're all struggling to fund their school system. They're cutting staff, they're cutting programs. There's infighting going on between the town councils and the school committee. So we're not in that situation, luckily, because of the Student Opportunity Act and the ESSER funding. So I think we're in a better place, as opposed to 10 years ago when Mr. Soto got on board. He always had a cut. So I think we're in a better place because of that. We want to maintain that going forward. That's what I'm concerned with. I know some of the schools and districts that I mentioned, I think maybe their planning wasn't that great. They're using ESSER money for one-time costs as opposed to long-range planning. So that's my take.
Thank you so much. Questions from the committee to Mr. Wellington? Dr. Gloria Caballero.
Thank you so much, Mr. Callahan. I have a question. How do you envision that we can make our budget sustainable now that we're in a better place, making sure that it is not just this year, but that it continues being in such a way that is sustainable and that we can count on those monies, those funds to really keep funding the programs and keep hiring people? What can we do?
That's our goal. I agree with you. That's my concern. Okay, that's my concern going forward. Who's going to be in this job in 5 or 10 years? I don't know, but just let's leave the district in a better place. I know Mr. Soto and Sean. I always butcher his last name, so I'm just going to call him the finance director. Okay. So I know they're putting together a 5-year school budget outlook. Is that the right term, Mr. Soto? Just like a 5-year plan looking forward. So I think that's going to be the true benefit, that we have a good team in place. We got our finance director and Mr. Soto, who are specialists in this process, so we don't get behind. We don't find ourselves in a pinch. I know we talked about, was it Brockton? All of a sudden, a Monday, things were great, and by Friday they had a $14 million budget deficit. Okay, how did that happen? Okay, where's the long-term plan and where's the short-term planning on that? So I think with the team we have in place, I think we're in a good spot moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Ms. Brunel.
Yeah, I'll just add to that too. Like a lot of it comes down to lobbying for money through the state. So MASC, of course, is our partner in advocating for that, and we'll be discussing in our full meeting tonight too. MASC's Day on the Hill, which is coming up, and the main budget priorities are to adjust the Chapter 70 inflation index to a full cap of 4.5%. So we got to make sure that the legislature is properly funding education. They need to fully fund the Student Opportunity Act and the special circuit breaker. And then they're also pushing for establishing a $100 per pupil minimum increment as a base number for future years. So, it's up to us too to continuously be advocating on the legislature side to make sure that we're getting adequate funding. But then also, of course, to Jay's point, making sure we're hiring people who do plan ahead for the future because, luckily our financial team did plan properly for our ESSER funding, plan properly ahead for the Student Opportunity Act, so that way we weren't funding positions that we couldn't afford for the long term. So those are some things we can keep an eye on too as a school board.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the next item that we had was collaborate with Holyoke Public Schools Administration to prepare and recommend the annual budget to the receiver for approval. And then the sub point for that was subcommittee members participate in school district operation and planning meetings. This is something that we already do, both of the subcommittee and full committee. We get the information and we also get to see the budget calendar as well. Even though we're not technically a functioning body, as the state is the one who has the power to make these decisions, we do vote to recommend things to the receiver on a regular basis as we look through all the different we vote to accept and then recommend to the receiver. The language, it sounds a little funny when you know that there's not real local control. However, we do go over it and we take it seriously and we listen to all the different things that come in those presentations as well. Conduct budget presentations and discussion at the subcommittee and full committee levels, which we do. Vote to recommend the annual budget to the receiver. Again, this is not something we get to vote on because we are not under local control, but we do receive all the information and discuss it as we go. As I have mentioned in the past, because we have as a body and a good relationship with our receiver, we get to have these discussions. And oftentimes, if there's something that we need to discuss further, we do. And whenever we need more information, we also request it and it is presented to us. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that as well. Any
Chime in?
comments?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll chime in.
Mr. Wellahan.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've been sort of blessed on this committee over the years since I've been here because each one of us brings our own niche to the committee. Like I said, Mr. Collin, he's been champion Dean Tech for decades. I don't want to age him, but for decades. Okay, that's a compliment. Again, just making sure our buildings are in good shape. And I know Mrs. LaFay just has been a champion of the having monies available for the subsec special education, the subsects in our programs, making sure those are funded. Mrs. Burnell has been a champion just to make sure we're getting her adequate monies from the state in terms of school choice reimbursements and the special education. So I think we kind of all bring our own perspectives to the committee, and I think it works well.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on. Engage HPS administration in discussions of quarterly budget updates. This is something that happens regularly, if it's not quarterly, sometimes monthly, depending on when the finance committee meets. And Mr. Soto prepares a monthly report that he sends over for discussion. So again, this is something that we have been doing and regular communication with the receiver. Recommend to the receiver budget transfers. This is something that I don't think historically has been done before, but I could be wrong. For those of you who have been in the committee before me can tell me more about that, but I don't think that this has been in place before, so this would be a new recommendation that we would have to work on and figure out the process for that. Review warrants payroll with the receiver. This is something that, again, we haven't necessarily been doing because, again, we're not under local control and that takes time and effort. But it's something that in preparation for transitioning to local control, one of the things that we were talking about, and Mr. Willihan can speak to this further, is revising what the protocol or the procedure was for reviewing warrants in the past and seeing how we're going to move with that to the future. Mr. Willihan.
Yeah, I wasn't on the finance committee before we went to receivership. I know Mrs. Burnell was on that with a couple other people, Mr. Burnell too. And I know, I think they just took turns going down to the central office just to sign the warrants. So that's something that we'd have to put together, just getting a plan going on that, just in terms of really the timing, what time are the warrants available, what days, who's gonna do it? Do we need a majority of the board to sign the warrants? That's my question. I know there's a provision in the law where the committee can adopt it, have one person sign the warrants, but that don't mean it's a good law. It's a provision that we can adopt, but whether that's right or wrong, that would have to be vetted. I'm maybe in favor of having some sort of a majority in place to sign the warrants. But moving forward, if that's a challenge, we have to revisit that.
Thank you. I also want to add that even though this has not been necessarily in place, they are available to us. If there was someone from the committee who wanted to go and look through them, they are available and we are informed of that. So that's something that, again, that we can start doing as well as we move forward. Then the last of the points that were given to us was assign a representative to observe collective bargaining. This has not been in place, and this is something that has to be discussed by the full body how that would be moving forward. I understand that as a recommendation, and that's something that we would need to discuss further, and it's something that has not been in place. Ms. Brunel.
Yes, thank you. So as Dr. Rivera Colon is alluding to, we had a wonderful meeting between myself, herself, Mr. Willihan, Mr. Soto, and our Chief of Finance. And, I know, Mr. Commissioner, one of the points you're looking for is kind of like, how do we plan to work moving forward? So we talked a lot about what's working now and what we want to see bringing forward. So I think it's important to note, we discussed reaching out to MASC and having Glenn come and teach another budget class, even though we just did it last year, but come in, teach another budget class to the subcommittee. And then also in that, helping the subcommittee with outlining the facilitation of how we're going to best work moving forward. So obviously in collaboration with you, making sure we're hitting all of our key points. But some of the things that we're doing now that maybe we weren't doing pre-receivership that we would like to continue to do moving forward would be, as an example, like the cost center levels and decentralizing the budget process. So, allowing the principals to establish what to do in their schools, but also, of course, with the consent of the superintendent, and the district giving them leadership and saying, you have to fill these key essential positions, and then what would you like your school to see and be able to have moving forward. So we'd really like to see the decisions keeping focus on what the building has to offer, especially in a unique district like us, where some buildings have different offerings than other buildings, whether it's dual language or vocational here at this campus or whatever it is that we have going on. The other things we discussed with that was staff allocations and discretionary spending. And then, for the school committee to start to plan to have regular meetings with the finance department and the superintendent ahead of budget season to kind of discuss our priorities. So I know that's something that Mr. Soto is working on now individually with us. So for me, as an example, it's art and music. I want to make sure the district's always being conscious of funding art and music so that we're providing a well-rounded day for our students. So like Jay had said, every committee member tends to have its focus and its priorities at the moment. So I know that Mr. Soto is working on doing that with us now, and I know that's something that we'd like to see continue moving forward. In regards to the assigning a representative to observe budget, collective bargaining, Aaron. My tongue doesn't want to work today. That's something that we thought was a good idea to implement now. So someone is learning or observing the process, again, in preparation for doing it out of receivership. So that's not something that we would necessarily continue out of receivership, because, of course, our role would be then to actually be active members as a committee in executive session for these things. So that was more like, this is what we could be doing now to be learning and to be preparing. And then there was one other point you had on there I wanted to touch on too. Budget transfers. So what Mr. Soto and we discussed was establishing some kind of figure, right? So that way somebody doesn't have to come to us for small transfers, but they would need to come to us for larger transfers. So again, within the work of the budget subcommittee and planning ahead, we would be discussing and establishing what those baselines look like. So that way we know moving forward how to best engage them when they come up. So those are some of the other things that we talked about moving forward too.
Thank you so much. Mr. Willihan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to follow up on what Mrs. Brunel said, yeah, I mean, it's not my goal to micromanage the school district. That's not my approach. We hired a superintendent to run the schools. That's their job. We're the oversight authority. That's my take on it. Okay, if you talk to other school members throughout the Commonwealth, they might have a different perspective, but that's mine. So again, what Mr. Burrell said, just having some sort of a threshold where if there's a major transfer that has to take place because of some reasoning, again, probably because the state didn't fund us accordingly like they should have. So that type of issue. So I can see that moving forward. My experience before receivership with the collective bargaining, I just, we just we let that up to the lawyers and the superintendent work out the contracts. When we discussed those in executive session, we either approved them or didn't. I remember going back and forth with some of the finance people at that point, where the school committee wanted to give larger raises, then there was a pushback back and forth. Whether I think that's how some of the local towns might have got in trouble because they gave out too big of contracts. Now they're sort of feeling the effects of that. So that's just my take. think we just should be, our role should be an oversight authority, kept in the loop. Okay, we don't want any surprises, like I said, in Brockton, where all of a sudden over the weekend they're in the whole $10 million. Okay, so that shouldn't happen. And again, just back to that long range planning that Mr. Soto mentioned. And again, what Mrs. Burdell said, just, sometimes what the state promises us in funding doesn't happen. It doesn't materialize, so we have to pivot, so I think, unfortunately, we're at the mercy of the state in a lot of regards in terms of the funding that, one, we expect and two, we get. Thank you.
Ms. Brunel.
Just to mention, I think it's important too, when you talk about, the long-term plan and capital planning, when we talk about our infrastructure, our buildings, right? Like, it's important to keep in mind too, like, our buildings ultimately are owned by the city. So we need to be working with our joint committee in collaboration with the city council to make sure that school projects are being funded easily that aren't within the purview of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, right? So repairs, things like that, because at the end of the day, the liability does come back on the city, and it increases the overall value of the properties for the city too, to keep these buildings in good maintenance. So I think it's critical that we start to focus more on our infrastructure and keeping them in good standing, so that way for the longevity of them we have good buildings. So that's partly why we refocused and renamed the finance and operations, so that way to ensure that we're keeping an eye on that end of it too, because finance is not just what goes into the day-to-day running of the school, it's the school itself.
Thank you so much. So one other thing that we added to the agenda as an additional evidence of how the budget calendar happened for over the last year. And I also highlighted all the places where a school committee has been involved. Not necessarily that I needed to show you all the evidence, because if you wanted to see, you could see all the agendas of all the last couple of years of all the budget and everything like that. But just in general as an overview, so that it's a matter of record that we have been involved in the budget before, and it's something that we are prepared to do moving forward. So now, for item 2, which I'm gonna invite the acting commissioner to speak on this, is what would be our next steps for building capacity? We already know that we want to utilize the resources that we have available from MASC in order to get our training for budget. Is there anything else that you were thinking that we needed to do? And have you seen enough of our evidence moving forward as well? Thank you.
Dr. Rivera-Colon, thank you so much. And really to all of you for a tremendous presentation tonight. I kept smiling and nodding as you went along. We're working from the same list, which I think is helpful about, what is the role of the school committee related to financial decisions, to budget and finance. And so it was just great, like you were doing, just ticking down the list of the ways in which the school committee has already taken action and things that you can see that you need to make some decisions on, such as, like you said, having MASC come back is a decision that it sounds like you want to make, and we're fully supportive of that. A decision around how to sign the warrants. So there's a kind of small technical things that just remain left to do. And a lot of it is just, I think for the idea of a plan, right? This section isn't going to be hard to write because you're already doing so much of it. And so it's just going to be to capture what you're already doing, showing our shared commitment that this is on the right path, and is supportive of a process that brings, both the sort of financial oversight, like you all said, as well as the kind of, public information that the school committee needs to provide, and the specific actions that a school committee needs to take relative to budget and finance. And, I appreciate, throwing, that you're adding in operations as well. So I think we're, very much on a really solid track here, and just very encouraged by everything that we're hearing tonight. I wonder if it's possible, if you would bear with me if I take maybe one quick step back to then talk about how we can then codify what we are doing here tonight. I'm wondering about, now that this is our third meeting, but our second meeting related to content. I'm wondering if what you all would think about us beginning to draft what the components of the plan will be. So for example, I really appreciated this conversation tonight. And like I said, I don't think this will be that hard to write because so many of the things are in place. And then we just need to identify a timeline for the things that, like taking a small example, like the signing of the warrants, when will the school committee decide if they want that to be an individual or, a quorum, or however you all want to slice that. So I think that's like one thing to name. But I worry about it if we go too far along without beginning to write things down, we might begin to forget, what did we talk about in each of these meetings? And so I would offer to you, if it's helpful for Desi to begin to draft the plan and share it with you very openly, 100% open for comments and feedback, so that, our goal is that by the time we get to that last meeting, that, that we've been developing this plan all the way along, and that we are all feeling very, confident about it once we get to our last meeting in August, as opposed to waiting, till we get to the end to start actually writing a plan. So wondering how you all, what your response is to that. And then, what we would maybe want to do is to take tonight's conversation and for our next meeting, begin to have a draft for you of what this would look like for your feedback and input. And then we can kind of keep this process going so that, again, we get to hopefully something that's just really solid and really actionable once we get to the end of this process.
Absolutely. I have started a draft of what that looks like that I want to share with our full school committee for feedback. And then once I do that, I'll send it over to you. So that way, if you have a draft that you're working on, we can kind of like merge them together and kind of see what things are the same, what things we need to add, and so on and so forth.
I love that. That sounds great.
And I'll just add that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Ms. Brunel.
My apologies. To your point, yes, we'll look forward to in transferring that document back and forth. We can try to establish the dates that we're looking for. When are we in what month we're going to have MASC out. So therefore that's the months, finance will draft their plan and then you guys can review. And so, it'll be good to start establishing the dates. But I know that Dr. Rivera-Colon has already definitely been working on a Google Doc to be outlining what we've already been covering.
And it does have a space for timeline as well. Okay. Acting Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. So I like that idea a lot of beginning to outline the steps, and a lot of I appreciate that we covered sort of the essentials. And Ms. Brunel, I especially appreciate that you brought up the development of the annual budget guidelines and priorities. So that, I think a budget is always that statement of priorities, and it's such a key document for, what are we investing in for our children. And so when we think about, the timeline for the 24-25 school year, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, that for these items that we've discussed, some are ongoing, but also, things like, when will the school committee have that discussion about, guidelines and priorities for the development of the fiscal year 26 budget, right? Something that I know that we would want to see in the draft that you all create, that we contribute to, and we talked about it tonight. And I was very encouraged when you brought that up, Ms. Brunel. And, that would be, a critical thing to each of those things that we talked about tonight. I'm just using that as an example to have in this plan would be what I just want to check to make sure we're calibrating that is the level of detail that we want to make sure we include.
Excellent. Absolutely. And then one thing that I want to, for everybody who is still following this from home, this also ties back to what we were talking about last time, because all of the things that we're doing in the budget also align with our strategic plan, which aligns with our turnaround plan. So this is all connected, and we're working on it moving forward as is. Ms. Brunel.
Yeah, to your point, Commissioner, if you reference the document that Jody attached, you'll see our structured budget outline for the previous year. So based on this, it would be like, say, December of this coming year that we would be starting to plan our overview of the start of the budget season for the following calendar year. But like I said, I know that Mr. Soto is already working on establishing those individual meetings with us to make sure that he knows our priorities. So I know that they're already starting to plan. But again, referencing this, there is some official timelines that we were working off of before that we can go off of and just adjust moving forward.
Excellent, excellent.
Thank you, Ms. Brunel. Mr. Willihan.
Yeah, thank you again. Yeah, I mean, I think the key take of this meeting tonight is just proper planning. 1-year plan, 5-year plan, long-term plan. That we have to pivot. If the state doesn't give us money that they promised a year ago, can we find that? Again, I'm just going back to the experts that we have in our district that have the ability to just lead us through those times. When you foul, again, I just keep pointing the finger to Amherst and to Northampton, and there's a give and take right now between the school committees and the town councils of like, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you plan that? Why didn't you plan this? So there's a back and forth. There's a distrust that's going on throughout those communities because they have a budget deficit. So that's just something that we want to alleviate here. Again, it's just one team, and just again with the proper planning and the proper expertise from the district, I think we can achieve a good goal moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. Caballero.
Well, thank you so much for these presentations and talks about the budget and the presence of the acting commissioner and the chief of staff. I am a new member of the board, and to me what it shows is how intentionally and proactively this school committee has been working for years and decades. And the fact that we're collaborating with you, Commissioner, is something that presents a common vision for our city moving forward. Collaborating with you and everybody, all the stakeholders, can only prove that Holyoke has been in a position of just wisdom for many decades, and trying to really preemptively, as I said before, look forward to get us out of receivership in such a way that budget is one of our priorities here, to see how we can, together, can put the city again in a good spotlight. Thank you so much.
I'd like to echo Dr. Caballero Roca's words as well, and just like I did in the first meeting, we stand in the shoulders of giants, right? There were people who were here from the very first year of receivership who really held the position and held all the mechanisms that we have now possible to be able to do what we do, so that when we had the right receiver who would listen to us also, and also have all of the people who are working really hard. For us, it was just a matter, for us as a new people, it was just a matter of learning what we needed to do, but it wasn't a matter of recreating or restarting. We are really just making official what has been happening already. So again, thank you to all of those who came before us, who have moved on to serve in other ways as well. I would like to ask the committee one last time if there are any other things that they would like to say before we move to the approval of the minutes next. Mr. Johnston, is your hand still up for a new thing?
Yes,
Or
I'm
was that? Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I
Sorry,
do
I wasn't
apologize.
sure.
I do apologize. I really appreciate how well you run the meeting, and I didn't want to interject, so thank you. So just wanted a couple of things. One is I just wanted to mention that, I've heard a bit of a narrative tonight around, the state promising funding and whether or not, if those funds are not made available. I know that, the state actually has made a lot of funding available to Holyoke through the receivership, which again, to Mr. Soto's credit, is not something that the district is reliant upon into the future. And so I think that's really, you've built a lot of sustainability around moving beyond the state investment and receivership, but I think you're referring to perhaps other forms of state funding. I just want to mention that if there's ever a question about that, if there's ever a concern, you know how to reach us. And we want to support Holyoke well. We want to advocate for Holyoke now and in the future. That desire for sustainability, that desire for being able to fund your priorities will always be one of our top priorities. And so just want you to know that, I feel like we've been very financially committed to the district and will continue to do so in the future. And so just wanted to make sure I just mentioned that. And then I also just want to put a quick note that I appreciate, again, the discussion earlier about drilling down the school committee, perhaps drilling down to school-based funding decisions. And there are different ways that Ms. Brunel, you brought that up. And what I appreciate about that is it sort of went beyond the checklist that we all looked at tonight and the kind of the traditional role of the school committee. And there are some options that other districts have investigated around this, and this might be just something that we note as a follow-up item to look into further. There are ways in which, for example, the school committee reviews, they don't have authority over school improvement plans, but the way in which a school committee sort of sets with the superintendent a deadline by which they want to review school improvement plans and can use that to understand what the priorities of the school are to then inform budget conversations is an option. There are ways in which districts have created a performance management framework to be able to understand the progress that each school is making for funding decisions. But I just want to put I think that item sort of went a little above and beyond in a good way. The checklist that we had to kind of work through tonight. And so I just wanted to name that I thought that was another encouraging aspect of tonight's meeting. And if it's something that this committee wanted to look at and maybe even build into this plan, I know that we'd be glad to be part of that conversation as well. So just wanted to name those two things.
Thank you so much. And just having that decentralized budget creation really mirrors who we are as a community, where all the voices are important. And it's much harder and inequitable to create a budget from an ivory tower for everybody else rather than actually listening to everybody who's going to be affected by that budget. So that's something that we definitely want to keep moving forward. Thank you. I don't see any other raised hands, so I will take a motion to approve the minutes for our 3/25/24 meeting.
So moved.
Ms. Brunel on the motion,
Second?
second by Dr. Caballero Roca. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much for that. And that's just the first. I have the other ones, so those are going to keep coming in our next meetings. Thank you so much to everybody in the room. We had also in attendance Miss Tensley Williams, which she snuck in and I didn't get to see her earlier. So thank you so much for
Lefebvre.
all, and Miss Lefebvre, of course, all of you for being here, and all of those of you at home for sticking with us and actually looking at what we're doing. And our student representative who was here earlier than me. So shout out to you as well. Thank you so much, everybody. And I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So, Ms. Brunel on the motion,
Oh.
second by Dr. Caballero Roca.
Sorry.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Again, thank you so much, Commissioner and Miss Chief of Staff Wu. Thank you so much for your trek on Zoom, and we hope to see you soon in person. Have a good one.
Good
Thanks so much.
night.
Thank you.
Thank
Meeting
you.
adjourned 5:53.